Hi, Founder fans. Jason here, and today's founder is John Thomas, the man who oversaw the fortification of Dorchester Heights. So, by the time the American Revolutionary War broke out, John Thomas was a practicing physician, but he had a lot of military experience. He'd already fought in King George's War and the Seven Years' War. So, once hostilities seem to be approaching, Thomas jumps in and he organizes a little militia that ends up running over during the Battle of Lexington and Concord, and following the Battle of Lexington and Concord, Thomas becomes one of the most important leaders of this fledgling little army they've put together now. When the Continental Congress organizes the Continental Army, George Washington heads over to Boston and they elect major generals and brigadier generals. Now, unfortunately, Thomas was not chosen as a major general. The reason for this is the Continental Congress wanted to select different generals from different colonies to make sure there wasn't too much infighting. And General Artemus Ward rightfully became number 2 in command after George Washington and the highest ranking major general in the Continental Army at the outset of the Revolutionary War. Unfortunately for Thomas, there were a few men from other states who had served below him who now were major generals serving above him, and Thomas didn't love that. At a time where it's very common for men to resign their commands to protect their honor, Thomas does resign his command to protect his honor. Now, he is persuaded by two very important people. Number one, George Washington, who basically says, "Come on, man, we really need everyone we need right now. You can't bail on us yet." And number two, interestingly, is Charles Lee, who is at this point, I believe, the number 3 ranking general in the Continental Army, one of the highest ranking major generals in the Continental Army. And well, Charles Lee basically says, "I also used to serve over people. You know who used to serve under me? George Washington. I technically outrank him if we're going by what the British Army had to say, but we're not going by what the British Army had to say. So suck it up and get back here." Thomas does. He is persuaded by this. He is, however, granted commission as a brigadier general, and he's actually made the highest ranking brigadier general, which in itself is a little controversial because now the highest ranking major general and brigadier general are both Massachusetts men. Granted, the fighting's taking place in Massachusetts, but Thomas gets this position. He is pacified for now, and he joins the fight. And he is there in Boston for a year during the Siege of Boston, which seemingly lasts forever, until, of course, Henry Knox is able to drag cannons from Fort Ticonderoga in New York through the snowy winter to the outskirts of Boston, Massachusetts, where George Washington has to decide what to do with them. And after some councils of war, the decision is made to fortify Dorchester Heights, which nowadays Dorchester Heights is kind of part of Boston. But back then, there used to be water in between because Boston used to look very different. It used to be just one little peninsula that connected Boston, the city, to the mainland of the rest of the United States. Now, of course, there's been a lot of land filled in, but Dorchester Heights is still higher than most of Boston, and at the time was up high and across the water. And the idea was if we can get cannons up there, we could fire down on the British. But the British could never fire back up. Guns just weren't what they weren't or what they are now. So the plan was set in motion. And who did they choose to lead this plan? Well, John Thomas over here. John Thomas takes 2,000 men. And I should note there were several other people who helped figure out what the best strategy for the fortifications were, where to put the cannons, all that. There were many people involved, including the 2,000 men that John Thomas led. But he was put in charge of the operation to get those cannons Henry Knox brought over up onto Dorchester Heights. And they were able to do this in one night, almost silently, because had the British been made aware that this was going on, the British most certainly would have sent men across on the water to attack, to stop them from putting it up there, because this was very strategically poor for the British. Now, fortunately for the Americans, John Thomas did an amazing job and was able to get this up overnight. So the British go to sleep, no big deal. They wake up in the morning, they look up, and they see that they are under the line of fire from cannons. They didn't actually fire the cannons, but they were exposed. And it's very similar actually to what happened a year before with the Battle of Bunker Hill. Difference is this time, there's a lot more Americans have come from other colonies over the course of a year, and this time the fort they wake up to see is full of cannons. And it's this effort that almost directly contributes to the British evacuation of Boston. It does directly contribute, but it is really the main reason that the British are like, well, okay, we need to regroup. And just a few weeks later, they do. They sail off on St. Patrick's Day, 1776, go to Halifax, meet up with some ships, end up going to New York later that year. But as for our friend John Thomas, the Brigadier General over here, well, his efforts are pretty well applauded, and he is almost immediately promoted to a major general in the Continental Army. And he is sent up to Canada because the invasion of Canada, which started very well, has started going very poorly, and they need a guy who can take over. And John Thomas is that guy. He is sent up to take over. Thomas had just a certain amount of respect for his men because he would get the dirt with them. Well, there were levels to society, and you don't often see the highest ranking officers mixing with the the privates and such. John Thomas would mix with all of the men, and this was what endeared him to them, and it's one of the reasons they fought tooth and nail for him. But it also became his undoing, because by the time he arrives in Canada to take over this failing invasion of Canada, there is an outbreak of smallpox, the pox. It is always a concern throughout the war, throughout colonial and early American history. Smallpox could just devastate a community. At the time, it was devastating the community of the Continental Army, and John Thomas goes in. He does the right thing where he separates them. Anyone showing symptoms of smallpox was separated in a different camp. Unfortunately, during this process, John Thomas himself caught smallpox, and shortly thereafter dies on June 2nd, 1776, after really being one of the most important players in the evacuation of the British from Boston. He doesn't even live long enough to see independence declared and the United States created. So it is a bit of a sad ending, but an extremely important person. If you enjoyed this video, definitely hit like, and if you're new here, subscribe. I talk about different founders 7 days a week, plus a lot more Revolution content all the time. So thank you for watching, and I will be back to you with another founder tomorrow.